Why was this report important to undertake? And specifically the timing of its curation and release. Why was this the right time to undertake and write and release this report?
Well, SMEs have always been at the heart of the Canadian and the Ontario economy. And it was absolutely critical to talk about it at this moment because unlike the recession in 2008, 2009, that actually affected larger companies more because it was primarily a financial crisis. It wasn't as much a Main Street crisis. This is very much a Main Street crisis. And small businesses have borne over 60% of all the job losses in the current recession. So it was really crucial to underscore those facts. But at the same time, we also thought it was important to not just be doom and gloom and how difficult things are for SMEs, but also to point out what amazingly resilient and creative and generous people make up entrepreneurship in Ontario and Canada. And so there are 28 really incredible case studies of companies in the middle of crisis finding ways forward, being creative, being generous, pivoting to new businesses, new lines of business, or new ways of delivering old business, and staying alive and thriving in that way.
Well, when you speak about the entrepreneurial spirit in general, what we're looking at is the idea that, sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Was there anything that surprised you when you were compiling this report? And was there anything that was reinforced about the entrepreneur's nature in general through this process? So were there any surprises? And what was a prevailing thought that was reinforced?
Look, it wasn't so much surprise. I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurship. I mean, it's what excites me about getting up every day and heading up the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, because entrepreneurship creates opportunity. And I come from a family of immigrants, and quite frankly, the ability within this country to start and build your own business enabled my family to go from no contacts, no money, no language skills, to building a great life for themselves and for their children by starting small businesses, as my dad did. So I'm never surprised by the creativity, by the discipline, by the sheer will of entrepreneurs. It's important to reinforce that message at every turn. But the cases, the case studies are always helpful because you can always learn things from them to help in your entrepreneurial journey. And so one of the things that's reinforced consistently through the piece is how important being able to adapt digitally and making the digital pivot are to entrepreneurs. And quite frankly, it reinforces for us at the Ontario Chamber a very important advocacy campaign that we've had for several years, and that this just reinforces. And that is that there is this incredible digital divide in Ontario. There are lots of regions in this province that don't have access to broadband internet. And you simply cannot compete in the economy of the 21st century on dial-up. So this helps to reinforce and tells those stories that we can use with the government to continue to push with government and private sector as to the importance of rolling out broadband throughout the province.
Wow, it's surprising to still hear that commentary about access to what we would consider and take for granted as, well, that's just how you do business. What do you mean you don't have broadband? What do you mean you can't access the internet, at the snap of your finger? And it's amazing to hear what you're saying. What other action steps then would you suggest on a federal, provincial, and even on a municipal level? What of all three levels of government, how can they contribute to not only correcting the access scenario to broadband, but what other issues do you feel that we need to be able to see more support or more visibility of action from the federal, provincial, and again, the municipal level as well?
Right. Well, look, I would start with an observation that we are most fortunate in Canada that we've seen a level of collaboration between local, provincial, and federal government that is unprecedented. I mean, they really have come together. And look, business is incredibly frustrated. We would want the policies to happen even faster. But government isn't built to be fast. It's built to be slow and plodding and careful for good reasons. You don't want billions of dollars to be spent willy-nilly. But this crisis has required people to come to the fore because the pace of change forced by the virus has meant that all of us have to change the speed at which decisions are made. We have to make sure that as we move from lockdown to reopening, that those programs of support, and there are still, in particular, the rental subsidy piece, which has to be improved, we have to make sure that there isn't a cliff and it's just shut off, that it's tapered, because as you reopen, you don't immediately go back to 100%. And so there's still going to be requirements for support for some time. But apart from that, the broad measures that are required, and this is something we put in a memo to all of the provincial premiers and the Prime Minister, and this was all of the chambers of commerce across Canada. Number one, far more capacity for testing. We simply have to know the extent of the problem that we're dealing with, particularly as we reopen and still don't have a vaccine, because we have to contain any spread of this virus. Testing is crucial to that, and it's good to see some of the progress that's been made. It wasn't long ago we were talking about 12,000 tests a day in Ontario. We now have hit several days above 28,000, which is remarkable progress. We still need more. Second, very pleased to hear the federal and provincial governments together on an announcement that of the rollout of an app for contact tracing, because testing is great, but once you have someone who tests positive, you want to quickly be able to find out who that person has been in contact with over the last several days, who he or she might have been infected by, or who in turn they might have infected. Contact tracing is a key part of that. Third, PPE. We have to have far more. People need masks. We're seeing now TTC, York Region, Ottawa, requiring masks on transit system because it's going to be incredibly difficult to keep physical distance in crowded subways. So masks at a minimum are going to be part of it. And we're calling on governments to help small businesses in particular that have less cash available in purchasing PPE and purchasing plexiglass dividers at cash registers and helping them with signage and retrofitting their operations and training of employees, because confidence, both for employees and for consumers are going to be crucial. And getting consumers and employees to work or to stores is going to be crucial. So what you're doing about public transit and what you're doing about daycare. We cannot reopen the economy to a great extent without giving young families an option, a safe and viable option around daycare. If not, they simply have to stay home and won't be there to come back to work.
So let's talk about those two elements. There seems to be a bit of a divide between consumer confidence and the sentiment of a business owner's anticipation of a reemergence and a resurgence to restore a norm that perhaps we hold as an ideal or an expectation. And there seems to be a gap between expectation and what we are actually experiencing. And, and there's always this thought that frustration is the canyon between expectation and experience. In this time, what can small business owners do to help boost consumer confidence? You mentioned a number of initiatives from PPE, from testing, all the other measures that we can do to reassure gatherings again, and coming back into storefronts and re-energizing business again. What else could potentially a business do, business owners, to keep their sentiment alive? And what else can we do to affect consumer confidence?
Right. Well, it's a great set of questions. And first off, you're absolutely right. If you look at every jurisdiction around the world that has reopened prior to us reopening, you see that just because you open it doesn't mean that they come. There's still a shortfall in terms of both employees and in terms of consumers. And so people have to really think about that and know that if you're building your business model, that the only way you can pay for all of this is to get back to 100% of where you were before the crisis, you're going to be sorely mistaken, because that has not been the pattern anywhere else in the world, and we're not seeing it here either. Secondly, you really have to, we can't guarantee, no one can promise that there will be no more infections and no more deaths. Absent a vaccine widely available, we can't make that promise. What we have to promise, what we have to do everything in our power to ensure, is that we're not stupid, that we are doing everything possible to keep people safe. And one of the things I've told my members is, if you feel you couldn't invite your children, your parents, your spouse into your facility, if you don't feel that it's safe enough to do that, you haven't done enough.
Wow.
You have to feel, because your customers, your employees, they're your family. They are at the heart of your business. And so if you are not prepared to have your children, your spouse, your parents come to your facility, you have not done enough to build confidence. Because that's saying you don't have enough confidence to make that invitation. And what that means is, yes, there are incredible guidelines, and the Ministry of Labor here in Ontario, every province has put together lists of steps. But what you're going to see is there being a race to the top, not to the lowest common denominator, the highest common denominator. And I'll give you a perfect example of this.
Please.
Several weeks ago, masks were not required pretty much anywhere unless you were in the hospital. And yet Longo's, a supermarket chain here in Southern Ontario, mandated that if you were going to shop at Longo's, you had to wear a mask. And if you didn't have a mask, you either had to buy one on the spot or get turned around. And a lot of people were upset by this and said, I live in a free country, and how dare you, and it's not required by a medical officer of health yet. Longo's stuck to their guns, not just to protect their customers, but to send a very strong message to their employees that they were going to do everything in their power to keep it a safe environment. And so they mandated masks because they had already seen New York City mandate masks. Right now, we live in a global information bubble. Through the internet, we can find out what others are doing. And inconsistency is at the heart of lack of confidence. So the more we can be consistent, the more we can operate at the highest level, not try to get away with the least possible. Do the most you can to do that, because we're all responsible for getting this right.
So it's interesting. You're saying that inconsistency leads to a lack of confidence. So therefore, if we were to flip the script, being consistent in your delivery of highest standards will grow consumer confidence.
100%. And you're seeing a number of programs in one, and you can go to postpromise.ca, which is a program that the federal government just supported the rollout of. And what it is something for all business owners. It's a checklist of the most basic steps around hand washing, around PPE, around training, and around cleanliness and what you're doing to do deep cleaning of your facilities. And you can take the post promise and confirm that you're following all of this. And then there are posters that you can print up that you can put in front of your facilities, your retail outlet, your factory, that you are following the post promise. That's part of it. But then you've got to really live the post promise by doing all of those things to the highest level that you can.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to review the report that was released this morning at 9 a.m. Thank you for compiling. What was so inspiring to me was all the stories of how our network of small and medium businesses in Ontario specifically, and Quebec and other places all came together. It was a powerful message to remind us of the power of small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. Now, for the businesses that weren't able to get on track as quickly as others, what resources and how could they connect with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and how can they receive some direction, guidance, some thoughts and inspiration the way that I've been inspired by going through the report? How can they connect?
Well, I encourage them to come to our website at occ.ca, and Small Business Big Impact is the name of the report, and I encourage them to read and be inspired, as you were and as I was, by the examples of very strong how-to laid out for businesses to follow. And it doesn't apply to every business, but the thought process behind shaking up your business model and thinking about what else could be done are always important messages to reinforce. There's also, through chamber.ca, which is the website of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, great resources from across Canada in terms of what's available on a province by province basis. And also for the next several weeks, there is a free accounting service that either by phone or online you can get in touch with that is funded by the federal government, and it's free accounting advice with respect to all of the subsidy programs that the federal government has put up. Do you apply? How do you apply? Do you qualify? And have someone help you think that through. So I encourage both of those avenues to all of your listeners.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Not only are you...